Hello, hello, everyone. We're so happy you're here. Hello, and I have the pleasure of welcoming Lainey Roll, and I'm so excited that she is here. If I have not met you before, I am Stephanie Rothstein, and I am proud to be one of the founders of Global GED, and this is going to be an amazing session, amazing session. So, the reason it's going to be an amazing session is because we have Lainey here. So I first met Lainey at a conference recently. We both were giving presentations at the conference. I was so stoked to listen to her presentation. And after that, I went quickly online and I bought her book. And then I read it on over the last couple of my walks outside, and Lainey makes fun of me for reading while walking. But I absolutely loved it. So without further ado, I'm so excited to have Lainey here, and she'll introduce herself, and then we'll get started on this awesome presentation.
Thank you for that. First of all, I don't mean to tease you. I'm just jealous because I have not mastered walking and reading at the same time. For me, reading alone is enough of a task. So I'm just inspired by you, and I'm going to try and multitask better. I am Lainey Rowell. I am an educator, an author, and a podcaster. And I am super excited to be here. And I'm excited. We're going to just jump right in. Should we, Steph?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, Lainey is quite humble. She's got a lovely resume. So if you don't already know, you should follow her and you should read lots of things that she does because she's amazing. So we will move on with the presentation, but please know she's one to read and follow because she puts out great work. Sorry, it's Rowell. I now have it. I think I've only said Lainey out loud, so I'm glad that.
I know. Well, my first and my last name are hard, so that's why I started a podcast, so I could say my name and hopefully some people would hear it. No, I'm just kidding. I don't like to really talk about myself. I like to talk about us, and so Steph, I really want to thank you for joining me in this session, and I'm going to rope you in, hopefully not more than you're happy about, but I do want us to have more of a conversation and get a chance to really chat about these ideas, because the topic is building community, and it doesn't make much sense to have just me talking about that. So for those who are watching live, I would love for you to share ideas in the comments, in the chat. I'm going to watch that as best I can. And then Steph and I will have a conversation. So should we get on with it?
Let's
really quickly. Before I even start chatting, I just want to point out, there's so many icons going on the screen, and it's almost just my reminders to myself. So if this wasn't being recorded, this live stream wasn't being recorded, I might use a record button, or Otter is a great tool for auto transcription of a chat. It records the audio and does the transcription. And then I also have a little template there for digital note taking. And then that's all the ways that you can connect with me on the bottom right. So without further ado, let's jump into it. So I'm going to start out by thanking you for a million things. Thank you for being here and having this time with us. And thank you for being in education still through this crazy cuckoo bananas time. I appreciate you all very, very much. And so I'm excited to hear what y'all think. And I'm going to try and multitask and watch the chat. But if I don't get a chance to catch everything, I will watch it there. So this slide is really just a reminder, because whenever I'm doing sessions with adults, I like to also talk about what I would normally do if I was doing a session with students. And I like to talk about our etiquette, and this won't be for today, obviously, but one of the tips that I learned, and I think this is a really great thing to think about as you're building culture or maintaining culture in your classroom, is to revisit those expectations every day. And so I love it when teachers have it okay, well, for today, let's focus on these things. I don't need your video today. You can turn your camera off. I don't need you to worry about certain things. Obviously, right now it's just one way, so muting the mic is irrelevant. But these are the things that I'd like you to focus on today. So just thought I would keep that in there to share. There's another example of a teacher doing that. I start every session, whether it's live or recorded, with an inclusion activity. And so the one that I like to do the most is the breathing. Steph, will you do this with me?
Of course I will.
I mean, I know you're breathing, but can we do some intentional mindfulness breathing? So this is one that I really like to do. I do a deep breath in for 5 seconds, hold for 2, and then breathe out deeply for 5 seconds. And then I tell my community to, repeat as necessary. So I can't count out loud and do this as much as I I try to be a multitasker. So I'm just going to go ahead and do it and hope people join in with us. And here we go. So breathing in for 5. That's super helpful to me because it's been kind of a back to back day. I don't know, Steph, do you do anything like that in the beginning of your stuff?
Yes. You know, I have a student teacher this year, and she's been really wonderful about putting those in at the start of many of our lessons, especially like we did one this past week with everything that was going on in the country. And she put that at the start of the lesson and said, we need to take some time to breathe. And if there's anything as you're breathing that you want to write to us, you can write it privately in our chat. We were on a Pear Deck at the time. So it just is I found that it really has helped us just center. And it wasn't, I would say, a part of my practice when we were in person, but now if and one day when I am able to return, this is for sure something I'm going to continue to do and bring back to the classroom. I just don't know that I was comfortable with it before, but now that it's a part of my practice, it feels much more natural.
Like that necessity to be more intentional with the SEL practices, now we're going to bring that into so many other ways. I have other resources specific to, excuse me, SEL. So if anyone's interested, hit me up on social media and I'm happy to share some stuff. There's really cool things that are being shared by other educators. So when I say I have stuff, I mean other people have created really cool stuff and I use it. So, all right, let's keep it going. Thank you so much for having this conversation. So Steph, you just finished reading the book, and maybe you can attest to these being kind of the big themes in the Evolving Learner book, which I wrote with Christy Andre and Lauren Steinman, and they're amazing. And I will tell you that when we started writing this book, the focus was on how can we improve our practice from learning with kids, peers, and the world. And then it was actually only as we were writing it that 2 other major themes emerged: the continuous improvement through cycles of inquiry, so important, especially the finding the focus. And Steph, maybe you've seen this, that it's really hard right now for us to find our focus and pick one thing to try and do really, really well before we move on to a million different tools or a million different strategies. And then we were just talking about that SEL being super intentional with that. So I think hopefully these are things that we'll kind of touch on as we go through this session. So I'm loving all of it. Go for it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I would say some of the things that I absolutely love is that no matter who you are, the themes within the book apply. So I love that you talk about every single person as a learner, and that comes across in the way that you talk about within each section of the book. So I won't kill what's coming next, but that for me was the piece that I continued to love, because what you were doing is modeling a practice that no matter who you are in education, that it will apply to you. And so then we continue to do that, right? Whether we're an administrator, whether we're in the classroom, whether you're a student, all of these will apply. And then you had pieces in there even about connecting to families and parents. It really was, no matter who you are, there's some way in when it's connected to education and learning.
Yeah. And I mean, I think back this slide, even we're on right now, who's working the hardest in the classroom. And this was something that my mentor, Alan November, would always ask when he was working with a group of teachers, think about your classroom, who's working the hardest. And it was, I've been in the room when he had asked them. It was always the teachers. It was unanimous, the teacher. And he would do a polling system, whatever it was. And it was always 95% or more would say the teacher is working the hardest. And so that's what we want to move into these relationships, into this community. And so what we want to do is we want to get it to where it's not this teacher driven, but it's this learner driven. And I know this looks really messy on the right side, but that's how it is. Relationships can be messy and learning should be messy, in my opinion. And so what we were really trying to do with this graphic, which is inspired by Austin Kleon, is we don't even want you to be able to know which one is the teacher. And in fact, we were very intentional in choosing that everyone in that learner driven is a circle, because everyone's not just a learner, they're also a teacher. And so how can we learn and teach each other? So that's kind of that. And I want to get on to some of the tips, but just a little bit more on this ownership of learning idea. And this is something I would love your thoughts on, Steph, and anyone else, if they want to drop it in the chat, is this can be really a provocative slide for some people, is when we say, like, where should we be? Should we be in a space where it's 100% teacher driven? Should we be where it's 100% learner driven? What would that even look like if it was 100% learner driven? And so before I like give my 2 cents on this, Steph, what do you think about this graphic?
Oh my, I mean, this speaks near and dear to my heart. And as I was reading that part as well, I think the word "should" in there, right, is the piece that then starts to maybe ruffle, like, because, and then if you're not, is there a judgment to it? At least for me in my own classroom, where I want to be is that right side, the learner driven, which is why I am a project-based learning teacher, design thinking instructor, right? That my students are driving it. They're picking the projects that they're doing, that what I'm giving is open-ended. They're learning from each other. Like we hold workshops, even though what we call specific things in the classroom is really learner focused. So I won't hold a workshop unless a student has a question around it. And then students can also lead those as well. So I do think that there are times and places and moments for when you do need an instructor, but who that instructor is, who is disseminating that information, doesn't always need to be the person that is the teacher in that space, I think, as well.
Yeah, and I think we have to really challenge ourselves here, because I think the default is to be teacher driven. In some ways it's easier, right? Mm-hmm. And that it's hard from a control, like letting go. And so I'm with you. We didn't put this graphic up thinking that, like, can we write a book to convince everyone that we should be 100% learner driven? It's more to challenge you to, like, well, how often can you get to that learner driven? Because to me, that's my preference. So it's not that it's necessarily going to be 100%. I always feel like, and you probably feel like this in PBL, like, you might need to do a little more scaffolding in the beginning as you're building more independence in your learners. But once we get to that more learner driven, and for those who aren't familiar with Sugata Mitra's work, that I would check him out, because he's advocating for 100% learner driven all the time. And so if you want to, like, really challenge your thinking, that would be an interesting one to check out. So we also, Steph, you mentioned this earlier, we want this to also be the same thing with our professional learning. And I think we sometimes feel as educators when we get pulled into something in a staff meeting and it's like the exact opposite of what we're being asked to do with our kids, right? Like we're being asked to do the learner driven with our kids, and then we get pulled into teacher driven in what we would call professional development. That's what we call in the book, for like more top down, no choice, very inflexible, all that kind of stuff. So very cool.
I know when I read that part, because in my district, we call it PD. And so then I went back and I was like, we need to start calling it professional learning. I just read this and I like have all these moments about it. But it really helped me to rethink, like that. You do talk about that really early on in the book about how it's about unlearning to then relearn. And I felt myself in that moment going, oh, I need to unlearn some of that. To then relearn what it could be.
And we try in the book to talk about, like, it can get into like, oh, well, that's just a new word. And we're just trying to kind of challenge that by saying, well, if we're thoughtful in it and we call it professional learning, we're saying that because we're being intentional in the way that we designed it. Because we know there's a lot of people who use the term professional development and they're doing amazing things. It's not like the term is inherently bad. So I saw someone in the chat said inquiry party. So they're probably happy to see this slide, because in online learning, because I have a background in online learning. I've been in education. This is where I feel really old. I've been in education for 23 years. And I don't mean like as a student, as an educator. And so, but a good portion of that, about 15 years ago, my district was a district that just the way that funding worked in our particular district, we could do online learning in a way that other school districts couldn't do. And so we were kind of one of the first to really dive deep into online learning. And I was so grateful for that, because I really got to understand the pedagogy of online learning. And so one of the things we talk about, and I'm not talking about, the situation that we're all working very, very hard to get through, but pre-COVID online learning, we would talk about community of inquiry. And so when we're building this community and maintaining this community, we want to have these elements. And I know this slide's maybe a little bit hard to see. I apologize about that. But we want to have social presence. We want to have those interpersonal And this is where we really want to push to not just the teacher to student, the one-on-one, which is very important, but also the peer-to-peer. And we also want to have that teaching presence. We want to make sure that we are seen as a teacher and they feel connected to us. And then that cognitive presence, we're all working together in this sustained, like we're communicating, we're building knowledge and building meaning and all that stuff. So I put that one in more as just like a resource reference, and hopefully people will find that. All of that to say, equifinality, this is like my favorite word. Some people find it a little bit clunky, but I just love it. I think it's a beautiful word because this is talking about how we could all have really good results, but have done totally different things in our practice. So there's not one way to do it. And for me, that's kind of like the beautiful and also overwhelming thing about being a teacher is that there's no recipe. And so we all have different ways that we can do things. So, or to put it as my friend Katie Novak likes to say, Dr. Novak says, firm goals, flexible means. So I am going to put this out there to all of you who are watching live. And thank you, Shannon. I'm glad you liked equifinality. I'll take that as one more fan of the word. But if y'all are watching live, and even if you're not watching live, I would just love you to think about like, what are your ways or what are your goals for building community? And if you want to drop that in the chat, and I'm going to turn to Steph and ask you, like for you in your role in education, like what is your goal for building community?
I have a few places where I have goals. So personally, my goals, I would say like personal, professionally. So like outside of my work life, what I want to continue to do is build that PLN and grow and connect with people who can help me to continue to push myself and continue to learn, like making more contacts like I did with Lainey. That for me is super valuable. And I like people who provide new and interesting ideas and resources that then can generate more for me internally. And then within, I would say, my school community, my goal is to help be able to build a space where students feel valued and that they can share and grow and that they themselves can lead moments of growing and doing community building within our own pathway together.
Yeah. And I love how you pointed out that there's more than one community, right? Like we have kind of like different communities. We have this community within our school, within our classroom, and then of course the world. And so I could go down a whole rabbit hole on how much social media has helped me, and then also how much I do to make sure that it doesn't hurt me. But maybe that's another conversation we can have. So I'll keep it moving. And Shannon, thank you for that. That it would be cool if, surround myself with a community of risk takers who are eager to grow together for the benefit of student learning. Yeah. And it's sometimes hard. Sometimes we have to be the one to model that risk taking and then kind of nudge people to come with us. So I totally get that. All right. So eSchool News did an article featuring some things that I had said in an interview, and then also featuring some things from the Lemonade Learning podcast, which we just launched season 2, plug. So basically what happened was Dennis Pierce, he took everything that I had said in an interview, everything we'd said on the podcast, and he came up with 5 tips. And so I just wanted to kind of run through those. And then those who are watching live, if you want to share, and then also Steph, I'm going to be picking your brain as we go. So first one, engage all stakeholders in norm setting. And I would really love some data on this. I would love to know how many teachers do this, because for me, this is kind of a no-brainer, but I don't know that everyone's with me on this. And so let me give you a little more on this about what I was thinking when I say that. So one, it's like setting the expectations, setting the stage, but it's also resetting it, because sometimes it doesn't, the term or whatever, the beginning of the year doesn't start the way we want it to. And so we sometimes, maybe we felt that this last year, I don't know. But sometimes we have to like go back and revisit some stuff. So I'm a huge fan of, I'm going to set priorities. I ask kids to set their priorities, and then we want to co-create the shared expectations. I want to make sure there's individual connections and peer-to-peer connections, like I was talking about earlier in the community of inquiry. And so I literally have a Google Doc. It is I mean, I'm sorry, it's probably the ugliest Google Doc that's ever been made. There's nothing to it. It's not pretty. This would never make it on the HyperDocs website. It's hideous. It's just, like one question on there. So, but it's all it is. It's just a blank doc. And I just ask, can you unmute and share what you think we need to be successful in this online community? Or can you put it in the chat? Because I know some people are not comfortable speaking out loud. So I want to give those two options. You can type it in the chat or you can say it out loud. But help me think through this. And I usually there's some ones that are pretty consistent. Sometimes there's some different ones. So Steph, I have a question coming for you, but I am kind of curious. Is this something that you do in your classroom? Am I taking this for granted, or is this something that a lot of people do?
I don't know if a lot do it. I do it in my classroom, although now that I think about how I started this year, I don't know that I did it with being virtual. Now that I'm thinking back to the start, but it normally is a practice within our pathway that we begin with what is the community that you want to see and what are the values and norms and protocols that would go along with that to support those. And then we'll talk through what are the values of our pathways called LEAD, and how can we best meet those, and what can we do, and how can we foster things in a classroom that would create a community to lead to those. So we talk about them. I don't know that I was as intentional about it now that I think back with being virtual. I think I was kind of in a space of going like, we need to make sure that we're all okay in terms of the tech and in terms of ourselves. So I'm going to help you with this part, but it likely is something that I should revisit now, at least for me, where we just started our spring semester. So it might be a good time to do a reset and do that, as it's not something that I did. In terms of other teachers, I often see they already have them written right on their, in our school, their green sheet or their syllabus or that beginning of the year. I don't usually have those, and I put on there, I'm waiting to write them. But yeah, so it's an interesting question.
I think it's fair to have your non-negotiables, to say like, I'm just not going to be okay with this. I'm not going to be okay with anyone hurting anyone. But one of the things that I like to do when I'm having learners co-create this with me is I don't say, if you let them just open it up and say, we shouldn't this and we shouldn't that, it gets to be a pretty long list. And what we do instead is say, okay, tell us what we should do, not what we shouldn't do. And if they give me a what we shouldn't do, I say, okay, we'll turn it around and tell me what we should do. And so that sometimes helps. But I totally get it that sometimes it's just not the way we started, but it doesn't mean we can't go back and also do it. So I think it's totally fair to have your non-negotiables, and then any bit of choice, especially now when we're all in this crazy time where we feel like a lot of the choices that we had pre-COVID have been taken away from us. We have to go outside wearing a mask, and some people find that a complete infringement on their personal rights. And so I think it's a good time to like give opportunities for people to make choices as much as they can. All right. So, well, that was not where I meant to go with that. Sorry about that. But if you're in the slide deck, that was a demonstration of how that will make you a copy of the world's ugliest Google Drive or Google Slide or Google Doc, whatever. Oh, look at that. I already asked you that question. So for those of you that are joining us live, thank you for being here. And if you want to drop that in while we keep talking, I'll just keep us moving, because I want to make sure and get to all the tips, and I want to make sure I have plenty of time to talk with Steph about them. So use get to know you activities. And I think that we tend to do this a lot in the very beginning of the year, but I think this is something that we can continue to do to just maintain that relationship, to maintain that community. And so I'm gonna try not to be on a soapbox here, but I'm just gonna tell you that I actually feel like I have had opportunities to get to know my learners better through blended and online models versus a traditional face-to-face, because I find it interesting. I don't consider myself necessarily an introvert or an extrovert all the time. I find myself kind of a situational introvert, a situational extrovert. So I am not necessarily the same, like I'm using my hands a lot right now. I don't necessarily do that when I'm just with a person in person. It tends to be something I do more when I'm speaking. And so what I find interesting is in this space where we give people asynchronous, like a discussion board, we'll have kids who would never raise their hand in class will completely thrive sharing their ideas in a discussion board because they don't necessarily have the confidence in their idea, or they don't like that forming the question or forming their thoughts on the fly. And so they need that space to craft their ideas before they're ready to share them. And so this is just my little, I want everyone out there to know that this is crazy, but this is not online learning the way that we did it pre-COVID. So there's so much good in blended and online learning. And I know it's hard that a lot of us were forced into it now, and we're feeling really disconnected. And like, this is like the hard stuff that we're dealing with, but we can still be connected, and there's still ways to have that community. And so I already mentioned discussion boards. We've got chats, we've got breakout rooms. Breakout rooms are a great opportunity to get smaller groups together, because sometimes you'll have kids who actually will speak up out loud. They just won't do it in front of 30 kids. They'll do it in front of 3 kids. And so I think that's a great one. And then collaborative spaces for both the synchronous and the asynchronous, and then just opportunities for peer feedback. I don't know about you, Steph, but I feel a lot of teachers are drowning trying to give feedback because we don't necessarily have the structures in place for peer feedback. And so it's like all falling on the teacher. And I don't know, is that something you've seen?
Oh my goodness, so much so. And I just had this conversation with my student teacher 2 days ago. And I said to her, I said, you know, normally I let you goal set for yourself. I was like, there is one goal that I have that I'm going to add to your list this year or for this semester. And it is about the amount of things that you are giving feedback on, and realizing that right now, right, she's teaching 2 or 3 courses. And one day it would be double that when she goes to actually being a full-time teacher. And I said, what you need to start to think about is what is going to actually be manageable while still providing students with the understanding of their own work. But going back to your question of who's doing the most work is doing the most learning, right? So if it's the teacher that's circling every single thing, that student is never learning how to do it. So we talked through at least our opening assignments where we're now moving into research and writing. But prior to that, we've been doing some reflective Flipgrids. And she said to me, I'm going to go through and I'm going to record a response to each and every student. And I said, okay, no, you're not. And I was like, I love that you want to do that. And we can go back and we can watch them at our leisure. But we're going to put students in breakout rooms. They're going to then know who their partners are. And those kids are going to watch each other's and record a response to each other. And then they're going to share that back in the class, and we're going to get some peer-to-peer. And that's what we did on Tuesday. And I just felt like, oh, students are like, they were learning from each other. And it didn't mean that she had to watch 30 for every period and 90 of them. It meant that they watched each other's. And then we learned who they watched and their feedback. We knew who didn't do it. We could check in with those students. It was so much better. And it was so much more immediate. So that's the piece, that's my takeaway, is that the more people that we have doing it, they can get feedback much faster. And then it becomes in-process feedback. But yeah, it's so life-changing. But the structures are key. You're so right.
And I really appreciate, and not to birdwalk, but you made an important point about a Flipgrid is asynchronous, and what you did was synchronous. Now, if you do a Flipgrid, that is work for you to do after hours versus if it's happening in class. So I'm not saying don't do Flipgrid, but be super intentional about when you want to do that. And so for me, if I'm going to do a discussion board or a Flipgrid, I want everyone getting a response. Doesn't have to be from me, but I want everyone to feel seen and heard. So I will make sure, initially, the first time I do discussion boards, it's intense for me. I'll just be honest. I do respond to everyone the first time we do a discussion board, because I'm also trying to model to learners what a good response would be, how it extends the conversation, how it questions, how it, really makes that conversation go deeper than just, I agree, or that was a nice comment, or great job, something like that. So
you are so right. That was what we were doing first semester. And I said to her, we've got to start to take the training wheels off of our 9th graders and help them realize that they can do that same thing for themselves. So I'm with you on that.
Cool. So this is just a little nod to social emotional learning, which I've referenced already, but we really have to build that, and not just for the kids, not just with the kids, but with each other as peers. And so I really hope that everyone feels like they're in that collaborative climate of trust, mutual respect, and honesty. So when I titled the session Building Communities, it's not just about building communities in our classroom, but at our schools, and then, you know, with our peers, and then obviously with the world. And so I think that's something that we can all chat about. So I'm going to put this out there. Steph, let's skip this one for now in the interest of time, but how terrible is it to skip the one on well-being? Oh, good Lord. Lord help me. All right. So,
we're breathing. We're okay. We're okay.
We did breathing. I know, but this is the problem, is that we're always like, oh, we don't have time for that. So no, I do want to talk about well-being, and hopefully we've done that enough throughout that you don't feel gypped on that. But I really, if anyone wants to talk about this more, please feel free to reach out to me on social media, because it is so important, and I want to make sure everyone's taking care of themselves. All right. This one's kind of related to tip 2, provide frequent opportunities for discussion. We already talked about this a little bit, being really intentional with that synchronous and asynchronous. For me, as an online learning teacher prior to COVID, most of the work was asynchronous, meaning it wasn't like we were doing live lessons the way that's happening right now, out of kind of, well, we're trying to make it feel as normal as it did when we were in person. So there's a real need to be super intentional with that synchronous and asynchronous. So I appreciate the conversation we just had about, like, what can we be doing during the live so that we're not just completely overwhelming ourselves. And so I could bird walk on this forever, but just, you're not alone. And so feel free to connect with others. And so this is just me connecting with some teachers in South America. And it was really fun to hear how they're going through they're going through the same shared experiences that we are. And it just kind of doesn't matter where we are in the world. We're all kind of in this together right now. And so I think that's a great opportunity to learn. So learning from kids, we can also learn from each other, and we can have these sharing of practices, both asynchronously and synchronously. And sorry, that one was another asynchronously, but I know that this is a Google group, so I wanted to give a nod to all the productivity and collaboration tools that we can use just to stay connected. Social emotional learning, I really did weave it throughout, didn't I? I mean, I guess that makes sense. It is a community building one. So when we're talking about Flipgrid and when we're talking about Google tools and all of these things, I just like to always chime in really, really quickly and talk about how it isn't the tools, it's the relationships the tools enable. Because I am someone, and I don't know, this is probably not you, Steph, but I see something new and shiny and I'm like, what is it? How can I get to it? Give me the new tool. And so in the book, we talk about finding that focus, your problem of practice. And so what I've trained myself to do is, when someone has the new shiny tool, I say, okay, well, right now I'm focusing on building community and focusing on building relationships and maintaining that community. And will this tool serve that purpose? And the answer is no, then that tool is not meant to be in my life right now. And I will set a reminder for like a month from now and check in with myself and see if that's maybe a better time to do it. Because I just feel like we have a hard time saying no to things. And so I'm really trying to stay focused on that. And then this is something that you can do with adults and with kids. I did it with a group of teachers that I worked with right before this session. And so just a nice optimistic closure, restorative practice circle. Like, I started this session feeling, and I'm feeling, I'm leaving feeling, So just kind of, and so I'll usually just say, if you'd like to say it out loud, you can. Otherwise, you can drop 2 words in the chat just to kind of let me know. And I'm always like, you're not going to hurt my feelings. Like, we're all in this together, right? Learner driven. This isn't like, it's not against me if it didn't go well. It's all of us in this together. So I think that's, so I'm going to ask a question more like for the peer-to-peer stuff and to anyone watching. And so how have you stayed connected to your team? Because I feel like we spend a lot of time talking about connecting with our learners, which obviously is critical. But what about with your peers, like those at your site, actually?
Gosh, you know, I was just talking with the co-chair of our pathway today about this is the hardest one for me. And I cannot seem to figure out why. Like, people that were directly across the hall or upstairs in our building, I have not talked to in so long. And the only space that we realized that we actually talk, like they're Many of them are no longer responding to emails. And it's not just from me, it's just like in general, that just is what's happening, is that we have a text chain, or I know Mel said WhatsApp chat. We have a group that where people post funny things in there. It's like we've had that group chat since when since the group of 10 teachers, we took a trip together to go visit another school, and we were doing professional learning at another school and doing joint professional learning. And we were modeling like how to do PLCs. So since then, we had a group chain chat of 10 of us. And just today, one of the teachers posted a funny picture from that trip that we took together. Do you remember this moment? On those ones, everybody will respond. So I'm realizing like I have to figure out the space where I can meet them. I don't know that I'm doing it really well right now. I worry that everyone's feeling so overwhelmed that I don't want to add one more thing to their plate. But so I often find that maybe it's my own fault. Like maybe I'm adding to the cycle where then I'll go, okay, well then I'll just do this thing so that it's not another burden for them. But instead, what I need to focus on is how to build back the relationship that is probably a bit severed from us not being as connected as we once were in seeing each other every single day, to then be in a place where we can really be working together. Because that's what I feel like isn't happening right now, is that because we don't see each other, I don't know that we're actually like doing collaborative work with our peers. I'm focused more on the students. So I don't know.
I worry about, so I mentioned right before this, I was doing a coaching session, and the principal jumped on, and like I had this anxiety because I know how I'm going to run this coaching session, and it's where I talk the least amount possible. And so I say that because I hope that those leaders who might be listening to this think about how could they take any whole staff time and dedicate it to letting people talk to each other rather than disseminating information. Again, it goes back to like, we should be modeling what we want to see happening with learners. I always by default say in our classrooms, but you know what I mean, like our virtual, whether they're in physically or if they're in remote learning, whatever it is, I really want to make sure we're giving that space, because we can't keep adding things on. So we have to think about what can we take away to make room for the stuff that we know is super critical. And so Mel, what are you saying about Flipgrid? I'm going to read this real quick.
I love that.
I post, we survived Flipgrid each Friday and share it with the group. I love that.
That's awesome.
I do think we have to kind of just improvise, and we're like renegotiating things in real time, but we absolutely have to make that space to connect to each other. And I think back to that image I shared earlier where you can see all the teachers in the hall wearing their masks, and it just, I almost get like really sad with those pictures, because I think about like they're so close yet so far, because if they don't get those opportunities to connect, that's really, really hard. So I encourage you to stay connected with your team. And if you're a leader, make sure that that is happening, because there's a lot going on. We got to give space. Be generous with your presence. And so this is one that I had a hard time learning as an online teacher pre-COVID, in fact, and that is that there was so many little things that I could do in person. And I had to try and think about the ways that I could be present for every individual, not just the whole group, but every individual in a remote setting. So it may mean, for me, it meant more phone calls and more direct emails or chats, and trying to think about, well, what is the way that's going to work best to connect with that person? And there's lots of ways that you can do it whole group, but I think it's super important to have one-to-one interactions with learners so that they really feel that teacher presence, like you're there for them. Because I feel like when our learners feel that we're there for them, not just the whole class, but them particularly, they're showing up for us. They're more likely to turn the camera on because they know we want to see them, not just the whole class and not for compliance, but we really want to see them. We care about them. And so I'm going to bring parents into this and families into this as well. And so one thing that I have seen that's kind of been a nice thing for involving families and giving a teacher presence and a school presence to them is hashtags. And so this is actually my neighborhood school principal, Julie Jennings, Haas principal. And so I love what she does. She's very intentional. She never shows faces, which is a lot easier now with masks, but she's very intentional and has been pre-COVID of showing what's happening on campus. Because even though pre-COVID, we could have some parents volunteering in the classroom, some parents who are working full-time or whatever their situation, that's never their reality. They don't get to go in and see what's happening on the campus. So I love this idea of sharing outside, especially now that literally no one whose parent family can make it onto campus because of at least in our area, no one's allowed on campus except for actual staff. I really think it's important to kind of have that transparency and show what's happening so people are not, because there's so much anxiety right now, right? And so to have that presence, not only with your learners, but with families and communities, I think is really important. This is actually from a private school in Louisiana. And they actually, this is from March of 2020. And so because there was so much anxiety and so many things happening, it was like, okay, well, tell us what you're doing at home, and we're going to post those pictures on Instagram with your permission. And so it was like, this is how learning is continuing, because I do believe that if you don't tell the story of what's happening in your school, others will make it up for you. And so I feel like you really need to have that presence, not just with the individuals, but also with the parents and the families. And so just some things, and I'd love to hear, Steph, your thoughts on this, but like, if there's any tips that you have that I don't have on here, if you want to, those who are watching, if you want to, I point over here because I have it up on another screen, but if there's anything that you're doing that's working, things that have worked for me well in the past are like family interest surveys and inventories. What's the best way to communicate with you? Like if I need to get you, should I be texting you? Should I be emailing you? What are all the ways that they can have two-way communication? And sharing the successes. Oh my gosh, I would love if we shared like 10 successes for every one thing where we need to talk about like, this is not going well. Because I feel like I get anxiety when I see a call from school, because it usually means someone's hurt or something did not go well. And I will not throw my kids under the bus. They're good kids. I have been fortunate not to get the like something went bad behavior wise. But usually when I get a call from the school, it's a health issue. Like someone's fallen, like. So I have this like visceral reaction when I get a call from the school. It's not good. Like, I need some positive calls home. Tell me what's going right. So I don't know. What about you, Steph?
Oh, you're so not alone with that. Every time I'm like I can feel, even as you're saying it, I was like, oh no, somebody has a fever. Okay. But yeah, I would agree. The other thing that I think is a newer epiphany for me, and maybe a benefit to when we are virtual, or a way that I will plan to bring back to the classroom, is the involvement of families and parents, and a way to make them feel connected. So I know for me, or to help them feel connected, I should say. My oldest daughter, her teacher recently, the students are working on a service learning project. And what he requested, he sent out a message to all of the families and asked, here are the topics. He didn't put what students were in what group. Students have selected these topics. Is anybody from our parental community, or do you know anybody that you would consider to have expertise in any of these topics? And could you put down a day of the week when you, like, he had days and he had specific times, and to list your name under that, and we'll figure out where the majority of people fall, and then we'll set up breakout spaces for you with those students. And he followed up with those of us. We just did that on Monday, was the first session. And I was meeting with a group of students. It was at a time that was convenient, like it worked for their classroom and for me. But I got an insight about what's going on in the room. And it was a time to actually like hear, they presented to me. I was an quote expert, but they were experts on their topic. And I was able to provide my own lens and a new set of eyes and some feedback for them, and then help to facilitate a discussion between the kids, the students that were there. And it made me go, that's what I want to do in my classroom. Like, that's a way that I want to involve families and older siblings and other people who can come back. And right now, while people are home, there might be a potential to have more opportunities for times like that.
Yeah, well, I love your intention and like, well, what can I, when we go back to fully face-to-face or whatever we go back to post-COVID, what are the practices that I can keep? Like maybe some families wouldn't have asked for this close of a connection to school, and that's okay, but we're here now. So let's like stay here and let's stay in this partnership. I love that. Yeah. And so I like to pepper the SEL stuff. And so for those of you, especially those of you in secondary, I just wanted to make you aware of a program called Inspire Ed, Yale Center for Emotional Intelligence, all about learning from kids and letting kids be advocates for SEL. And they actually do workshops for adults on SEL. So I love that. And that's a free thing that y'all can check out. Why do I keep clicking on stuff? Oh my goodness. All right, let's see if I can make it that way. So we already talked about this. I'm going to go ahead and keep going. I want to get onto this fifth one, and then we'll wrap it up, Steph, and I'll put up my last slide. There's extra slides in here. I always overplan, but it's everything that's in there after here is self-explanatory, just for your own, if you're interested in diving deeper. So encourage the peer-to-peer. And I know we touched on this earlier, but I feel like I can never say this too much, because I feel like this is the one where I think I just have to try and be less helpful in a sense, because I feel like I always want to be the one guiding everything. And so I have to kind of train myself to like, could a kid do this? Could a kid help another kid do this? Like, how does it not have to always be me? And so I think about, like we talked about in breakout rooms, I'm a huge fan of peer instruction. There's so many different models out there that really encourage peer-to-peer support. I love a discussion board that's just like, what questions do you have? And then let the kids respond to each other and really be more strategic about inserting myself rather than coming to the rescue all the time. Because that's kind of my, if I'm not really careful, it's probably the hardest thing as an educator for me to do is not rescue. It's not easy. It's really not.
It isn't. I think if you're going into teaching to want to help serve, support students, I think it's a natural thing that you have to kind of curb and go, oh, wait, could I ask a question back to them when I ask this? Can I help them to get there, right? Like, can I help them to then seek that out from someone else? But that in itself is a skill. If I always am coming to the rescue, they're never going to be able to learn how to navigate that, which is a skill that they will need when they leave my room. So that consistent reminder, I love that you have that as number 5.
I do need that a lot. So the peer-to-peer support, and it's going to save you, if it's peer feedback, it's going to save you time. It's going to save them time getting feedback faster often. And so I think that's really, really helpful. So this is just another little research slide, but I'm trying to kind of speak to those decision makers who might be watching, who have a choice with our teachers' times. And so talking about how the peer-to-peer support isn't just for the kids, it's for the adults too. And so this is just some Joyce and Showers, some pretty well-known research about if we want to improve our practice, what's going to get us there. And if you just want to fast forward over to that 80 to 90%, like how is it going to actually make it into our practice? It has to be through coaching and mentoring. And so we have to be helping each other. And so even if you don't have a coach on campus, everyone knows something, everyone has something to share. We can all learn from each other. And so I think that's really important. And then this is just something that I like to remind people. And this is the best teacher learning comes from seeing each other in practice. So Steph, we did that presentation at the same event, and I was doing it at the same time you were doing yours. And so I'm like, where's the recording? I need to see what you did, because I want to learn from you, because I want to see you in practice. And so with that, there's some other slides in here with just some resources, but I'm going to go ahead and jump to kind of the last slide I have, if I can get there. I'm going to get out of the preview mode here.
While you're doing that, I would say, like, as you're finding it, that is my favorite thing, is watching others in practice. And I feel quite honored when I'm able to have that time. That time for me is my honestly, my favorite part of my job, like when I just get to go be in a teacher's room and I learn something every time. I write something down and I'm like, oh, they're doing that. That is so smart. And right now, like one of the people I observe, I teach English as my subject, but I coach all different people and mentor and support. So he's a Spanish teacher, and I'm like, I can follow along for Spanish level 3. We're doing okay, but I wouldn't have even needed to know the language to be able to follow some of his practices. I could still pull out and go, oh, that's amazing. I love how he does these really creative brain breaks. I hadn't thought about doing that in the same way, right? He had all of these practices and methodologies that were purposeful and intentional, and he had specific things that he would do. And then the other thing I recently learned from him is his breakout rooms were super short. Like they would go and then come right back. And I was like, oh, I should make mine a little fast. Like I found myself every time I'm like, oh, that's a new thing I learned from Pablo today. Like I absolutely love it. So I feel like the more often we get the opportunity to observe and sit in, like that's another thing that I would say is a plus to being virtual, is I've had way more opportunities to go, can I just like sit in? They can send me a link and I can come to it as I can. It's lovely. And to watch back recordings, all of that stuff. So did I give you that one, Lainey?
Yeah, no, I mean, I've had it before where a principal has set up a schedule where I get to go from like an hour, I drop into like 6 different classes, like 10 minutes in each class. And it's so amazing because I'm almost doing a like student's day condensed into an hour. Like I'm getting to see like the different personalities, the different teachers, and the different way that they're interacting with their students. So if there's any way, any flexibility in your schedules where you can see each other in practice, I highly recommend it.
Oh, you have, Mel is very excited. Look at, yes. She's like, freebies, what's happening?
Yes, you can, thanks Mel. You can, yes, I will happily send you some swag. Feel free. And we actually have new stickers for Lemonade Learning because I don't know if you noticed, we launched a new logo today. And so I'm very excited about that. So I actually need to update it on the slide. How embarrassing. Haven't gotten to that yet.
It's okay. It's okay. It'll be a surprise.
Yes.
But congratulations on that, by the way. Yeah. So exciting. You have had some amazing guests on the podcast. Oh my gosh. From the last season. I was looking back.
Yeah.
So if you have not listened, I highly recommend it. It's one to add for sure.
I'm not sure where Mel is, but I'm taking it. It might not be in the United States.
Yeah, Mel is down in South America. She's in Colombia.
Right I'll send this to South America. Give me the address.
She said it might take 6 months, and she's not lying. I don't think she's exaggerating on that, but she said it will be worth it.
Okay, so just so you know, I sent stickers to someone in Ireland, and he got it before someone in Florida, and I was like, how does that happen? So I feel like you just don't know. You just don't know. So.
We'll take our chances on it, Mel.
Exactly.
I trust Lainey's mailing skills.
Oh, thanks, Mel.
Oh, yeah. She's the best. Okay. Any other pieces that I know, any other questions? I can look back. I wasn't seeing, I think people were chiming in as we were talking. Abed had some recommendations for a great innovator project that helps with social media as people were looking at things, but lots of good reflective recommendations and thoughts in the chat. I think if you have more questions, Lainey is so responsive. So if you find her, if you are not connected to her on social media, or if you want to email her, she is wonderful about messaging back and staying connected and interacting in the conversation. She talks about it even in the book about all of those things. And so I appreciate that about her, because I think one of the things that you do that I really appreciate, Lainey, is you've done all these things, but no matter who we are, like people who stayed to chat with you after a session, I think you help make each person feel quite valued in those conversations. And we all are able to learn from that, even that way of interacting with someone is a model of a practice that I so appreciate about you. So really,
you're so sweet. I just love learning from other educators. So I learn from everyone. And so please reach out if I can connect with you on social media, or like like Steph said, there's my email, there's my phone. I don't know if that's a great practice, but anyways, WhatsApp me or text me. But yeah, I'd love to connect.
That's awesome. Oh, I got it so excited I threw my pen. Okay. But thank you so much for being here today. If there's any other closing words, Lainey, I don't want to steal any thunder at the end. If there's anything else that you wanted to say.
I'm just excited for, I know this is a really difficult time and I feel like we see the light at the end of the tunnel, but I'm very optimistic that, like we talked about there's going to be some practices that we would have not even thought to attempt in the face-to-face that we will now not let go of after this experience, and we will bring into the face-to-face, and we'll be really, really smart about how to leverage the synchronous and the asynchronous and how we can meet learners where they are rather than always asking them to come to us.
I agree. And I also feel quite hopeful for the one day when, at least for me, where I'm fully virtual, when we can go back. I know, like, my own 3 kids that are in elementary, they're going twice a week, and I have never heard them, because it's a really small school, I have never heard them. They always loved school, but now when I ask them about those days when they get to go, I'll say, "How was it, Izzy?" And she'll go, "It was amazing." Just as, like, so happy about being there, you know. It almost makes me tear up. That I hope that my hope really is that when we are back, that the things that are great remain, that we grow from this practice, and that we all feel like more appreciative about what we didn't realize that we had before. And I am excited about some of those possibilities in the next year or so and what that'll mean. So thanks for bringing us into our practice today, Lainey. And with that, Anne, if you want to chat with me about anything in her book, I'm more than happy to chat with you about it, because it was a great read. So, and knowing an author is super cool. So I feel really cool just by seeing it. But thank you all for being here today. We'll close with a goodbye video that I think Abbott or Shannon will put up. But thank you so much from all of us here at Global, and thank you, Lainey. And we'll be back in 2 weeks with another with another session. So we're excited to be back again. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.